Today, let's talk all about branding your podcast. What sets you apart from other podcasts that are out in the marketplace? I've got some answers for you coming up next. Hey there, podcaster. My name is Ashan Man, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. And today's video is powered by Agora Pulse, and of course sponsored by my brand new podcast called The Swing Shift Side Hustle, which you can find right now available in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you find your podcasts. Links for the podcast are down in the description below on YouTube, so make sure you head on over there and you can subscribe. Maybe make sure you rate and review so we can get it in the ears of other podcasters who are looking for a podcast like it. So what is the podcast about? Real quick. It's a podcast for creatives, not just podcasters, but creatives just like you who are looking for that little extra spark of inspiration to hear the stories of other creatives who are seeing their creative endeavors come to fruition. So hopefully these stories will help inspire you to move forward. The first couple of episodes are, of course, with musicians. So it's going to be with Greta Van Fleet and, of course, a band called Dead. It's one of the lead singers who happens to live in my town and is doing a national tour. So we just don't talk about music. We talk about the deeper parts of their creative process. So go on over there and make sure you rate and subscribe, rate, and review for it. And I would really appreciate that. Of course, today's video, we're talking all about branding a podcast and what sets you apart from other podcasts that are out in the marketplace. As of this year, there's about 525,000 podcasts that are out in the marketplace itself. And so when you're talking about 500,000 podcasts, you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, how do I even make a dent in something that is so massive when there's podcasts that are out there that are like mine? And how do I get mine to be a little bit more noticed a little bit more? This question comes from a community member here on YouTube named George. He has a fishing podcast, which I will link down in the description below if you're interested in looking at his podcast. But he asked a question about how can, let's talk about branding. What kind of branding ideas do you have for people who want to get listeners to remember their podcast? So the first thing that came to mind when I just started brainstorming after I read his comment was like, gosh, well, the number one thing that I think you should be doing as a podcaster alone, is that you have to be doing what other people won't do. All right. What does that mean? Well, if you've ever listened to a podcast or if you've ever seen a TV show or some type of program that does really amazing things in your eyes, and you're like, I want to look just like that, but not look just like that. I want to have the same elements, similar elements to it. And you go into the marketplace of podcasts and you see that no one is doing that. Why don't you do it? Why don't you go out and make it happen? Why don't you see it to fruition? All right. Now, the first thing that I want to talk to you about when it comes to branding a podcast is sound design. That's something that most podcasters don't do. They don't sound design their podcast. All right. And what do I mean by sound designing a podcast? What I'm talking about is the intro, maybe the outro, and of course, maybe some middle elements, which you might call a bumper, or in the radio, we call them sweepers. All right. And those are particularly sound designed by someone out in the United States or around the world who that's all they specialize in. They create a specific sound design. Now, if I were to nail this down a little bit further, let's talk about sound design in terms of listening to radio, popular radio in metropolitan areas. If you've ever been to a metropolitan area and you've listened to a specific radio station, like let's take KUPD here in Phoenix or KLOS in Los Angeles, or you go out into the East Coast and you hear all those popular radio stations out there and you hear the voice that comes over and you hear all the sounds that come over. That's a uniquely sound design radio station, so that the sound design can help the listener remember what the brand is all about. All right. Now, most podcasts don't do this. What most podcasts do are just a music bed underneath, and then it's someone talking over that music bed, and they're saying, hey, welcome to the Swing Shift Side Hustle, a podcast for creatives who do blank, 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 blank. And to me, and in my eyes, this is just my eyes, it's my opinion, I think that's boring. I think it's very boring. It adds no spice to whatever it is that you are trying to do. As I said, if you go to like Swing Shift Side Hustle, you hear that's all sound designed by myself. Now, what can you do to sound design? Well, you're just going to have to learn how to play with sounds. That's what it is. You're going to have to learn how to play with sounds, learn how to play with your voice, and learn how to use programs like Adobe Audition. Use all the functions inside of Audacity, whatever it is. But a sound design, quality sound design podcast will help people remember what your podcast is all about. All right. Next, let's talk about a quality listening experience. Do what other people and other podcasters aren't doing. Maybe they are not giving the listener a quality listening experience. This means that maybe your podcast needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Some podcasters just go in and they just start talking and it just makes no sense. And it's like you listen to the first 5 minutes of the podcast and it just makes no sense. There's no direction. So do what most podcasters, or I wouldn't say most podcasters, but do what other podcasters aren't doing. Give an agenda at the beginning of the podcast by saying, this is what I'm going to be talking about. And then, of course, jump into the content in the middle of the podcast and then sum it up at the very end. Some podcasters just don't even do that. They just banter on about nothing. They talk about their day. They talk about their cat. They talk about why it's raining outside. Unless the topic had a little more specific direction, then maybe more people would be listening. All right. Next thing that you should be doing is do what most podcasters won't do. Create imaginative program segments. This is something that is done in talk radio. We do it in music radio itself, but create imaginative segments that are either games, maybe there are entertainment drills, maybe they are all about talking about a specific topic. With podcasting, it can be the name of the podcast. I mean, there's names of morning shows all over the nation, right? There's like the Bill and Tom morning show or whatever, but within that morning show itself, they have these individualized segments that last either 5 minutes, they last 20 minutes, they last maybe 15 minutes, it doesn't matter, but they are branded, specifically branded for a topic. So it could be an entertainment drill, it could be a music review, it can be, today's top entrepreneur pick and why they're the top entrepreneur pick. So create imaginative program segments to break up the monotony of the podcast. Now, can you just do a full interview? Yes, you can do a full interview, but maybe within that full interview, you create segments for that particular guest where you're asking them like, a lightning round set of questions, like Energizer or Duracell, and they have to answer those questions like right then, like, Superman or Wonder Woman, and they just have to answer those questions. So come up with those creative, imaginative segments, and that will help you separate yourself out from the other podcasts that are out there. All right. Also, give people the opportunity to reach out to you on social media. This is something that I pride myself on. Very huge. I love the fact and invite people on my podcast. And as you see on this YouTube channel, I'm always inviting you to communicate with me here on YouTube. And it's one of the best ways that you can reinforce your brand and help people remember who you are and be a part of your community. So invite them in the beginning of your podcast. If you're just starting and you've released maybe 2 or 3 episodes, I want you to start getting into the habit of inviting people to connect with you, whether it be on Facebook, Twitter. You can use WordPress plugins like SpeakPipe, where they can leave voicemails and maybe you feature them in a particular audio podcast, whatever it may be. So invite them to communicate with you and make sure that you are communicating back with them. That is where the gold is. If you communicate back with them and you engage with them, you ask them questions to keep the conversation moving, that will help them, or that will help them remember your brand solidly over the course of however long they decide to stick with you. Okay. And be friendly. Of course, always be friendly. People just don't like someone who's just rude and just is looking for the listens and the downloads. Just build a community around whatever you're trying to do. All right. I have more tips that you might want to check out that are on the blog over at theshanman.com. I'm looking at them right now. I'm talking about on the blog, develop a solid position statement. Also, transparency, being transparent is a huge thing right there. So that's all over on the blog if you're very interested in reading more about that. There's an audio blog version of this that is more like audiobook style that you can go ahead and play in the player over there if you want to check that out. If you like this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up, and of course hit that little bell and subscribe to this particular YouTube channel. I would really appreciate it. And if you have questions, you can always hit me up in the comment section on YouTube, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can, because that is, like I said, something that I really pride myself on and love to help build a community. And of course, if you're jumping into the podcasting game for the very first time and you're trying to figure out where all this fits into your overall scheme of your particular creative project, go ahead and click up here. There's an essential equipment guide that I would love for you to check out. It will give you all the tips, and it'll show you the types of equipment, kind of like this board that I'm using right here, to create a podcast that sounds quality, and it will definitely help you out. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.